Hey, nice to meet you. You came for a camera lesson, right? All right, well, nice to meet you. I'm your instructor. My name's Matt. So you got a camera, right? Because we're just gonna go over the basic settings today, and just a couple things for whenever you want to start going out and making pictures, whether it's for yourself or if you want to learn a little bit more, start a business, or you can make money taking pictures. But it's also good for just making memories for your family and friends and just kind of documenting your life. So here's my camera. So we're just gonna go over your camera settings based on what I have on my camera here. And the great thing about this camera is it actually looks like an old film camera. Here, I'll take this big honking hood off here. Oh, there we go. But it's actually a very inconspicuous digital camera. You can see in the back there's a screen. So anyway, let's go over some basic camera settings. The first thing we'll go over is the exposure triangle, sure. And this is probably the most basic principle of just, getting your photograph the right brightness. And but there's also different creative things you can do with some of these settings I'm going to go over to achieve different effects for your pictures. So if you look on your camera here, mine has an aperture ring. Sometimes you just listen to that. You might be able to control that with a dial on the back here. Dial right there, something like that, or maybe sometimes they're on the front. You can, or maybe you have a function button on the top. You can do different things with that. So, but mine has an aperture ring. You may or may not have that, but however you control your aperture, this has to do with the opening in your lens. So let me just turn this on here. If you look in there, as I close down my aperture, you can see that little hole is getting smaller. Aperture actually just means like a tiny opening. So if you have it wide open like that, the maximum aperture on this is f2, the biggest aperture. And that is letting in the most light, because you can see the opening's the biggest, but that gives you the shallowest depth of field out of all your apertures. But if you close it down here to f16, which right there is the smallest aperture, you're letting in the least amount of light, but getting the deepest depth of field. So that might be good if you want to take a landscape shot and you want everything to be in focus. So there's your aperture. And oh, by the way, if you want a shallow depth of field like f2, it might be better for portraits. So you take your subject and you have a nice blurry background. So that's something you can do with your aperture. And then what's also great about this camera is the other two parts of the exposure triangle are right here up top. So these numbers, these big ones, it goes from 1 to 4,000. That is your shutter speed. And this is all, this isn't really important, but things with photography are logarithmic. So your aperture f2, one stop, which is twice as much light or half as much light. So half as much light is at f2.8, and then it goes f4, 5.6, 8, 11, and 16. As you go to the higher number apertures, I don't even know. I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't even know. But it has to do with logarithmic something. So that's just why the numbers are all weird and specific, and not just nice round numbers. So, but for your shutter speed, from 1, and then it just basically doubles. 1, 2, 4, 8, and then instead of 16, they have 15, 30, 60, 125, 250, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000. And that is the speed, and that would be over 1. So 1 over 1 would be 1 second, or 1 over 4,000 would be a 4,000th of a second. That's how fast your shutter is actually closing, and how fast your picture is being taken. So this could freeze motion if you're shooting sports action photography and you want it to look like they're just frozen in time, or if you want to, maybe make your shutter speed slower and you're taking a picture of a moving subject, you can see that movement in it, and it's like more how your eyes actually see it. Whenever you go to video, you usually have a shutter speed that is double your frame rate, because that looks the most like your eyes perceive motion. But anyway, yeah, that's your shutter speed. So far we've gone over aperture and shutter speed. That's two parts of the exposure triangle. The last part is ISO. So in my opinion, aperture and shutter speed are, sorry, let me just get this here. Very simple. Anyway, Your aperture and your shutter speed are the most important things, in my opinion. Those are the things you do the creative stuff with, in that you're freezing motion, or you're allowing to see motion, or you're getting a shallow or deep depth of field. Those are all things that you can consciously think of whenever you're choosing your aperture and your shutter speed. But it all depends on how much light you have available as well, because if you want to shoot at f16 and 4,000th of a shutter, you better have a lot of light, because your shutter's only being open for a very short amount of time and your aperture's shut down very small, so only a little bit of light is coming through your lens anyway. Anyway, the last part of the exposure triangle, I think this just depends on how much light is available. So the most important parts are the aperture and shutter speed, but the last part is ISO, or ISO some people call it. On my camera, yours might go down to ISO 100, but mine starts at the base ISO of 200, and it goes all the way up to, let's see, 128,000. So that is just digital gain on your camera. So you want to shoot as the lowest number ISO as you can, because it looks the best. Sorry, I lost my role of being a trainer here. But anyway, yeah. So you want to have the lowest number ISO as you can get, because the higher your ISO number, the more grainy your picture is going to be. But maybe you want that, so that's another creative way that you can use that. So there's the 3 parts of the exposure triangle. And with that, you can take a properly exposed photograph. That is probably the most important part of photography. It's the only important part of photography if you're shooting black and white. But whenever color comes into the equation, there's another thing you have to consider, and that's your white balance. So your eyes, it's interesting. Obviously, cameras are modeled after the human eye. The aperture opening and closing is like your pupil dilating and responding to light. And then even down to the image sensor, the red, blue, and green dots, that's like I can't remember if it's your rods or your cones, but one of those is important for the color that you see, and the other one's important for like black and white, so when you're seeing at night, just to be able to see shapes and objects. It's the same exact thing as an image sensor. But anyway, white balance. Your eyes automatically adjust, whether you're outside or you're inside under house lights. Your eyes automatically adjust to the light that's around you. So you don't realize whenever you're at your house at night and you're using your house lights that it's very orange, and everything looks orange, and it affects the colors of everything. So you might take a picture and it looks really orange, and you don't understand why. It's because your eyes are automatically adjusting for it. And that's why white balance is important. You could set a Kelvin value, or sometimes your camera has different settings. So just generally, if you're under fluorescent lights or incandescent lights, which would be like house lights, or if you're out in the sunshine or the shade, you can set it to that, or you can assign a Kelvin value, which is a color temperature. So daylight is generally from 5,600 Kelvin to 5,300 Kelvin-ish. It's not a set color temperature, because daylight changes in color throughout the day. Obviously, it's very cool in the morning, or sometimes it's warm if you have a really nice sunset, and it's warm at night, and it's more neutral and white, kind of coolish during the day, and it kind of varies throughout. So that's generally that. But under house lights, you might be at 3,200 Kelvin. So it's important to keep track of that, so your pictures aren't too orange or too blue. But there's also another part of white balance, and that's magenta and green. Sometimes the light is very, very purple or magenta at a sunset, and you want to bring it and make it a little bit more green, or vice versa. Sometimes your white balance gets thrown off whenever you're shooting out in the woods and there's lots of greens, and it tries to overcompensate and make things purple. And you'll see that in a person's skin tones, when you don't really notice it just because it's trying to correct for the greens, but you see the person's face looks really purplish and not flattering. So that's another thing to look out for with your white balance. So those are all the different basic settings of your camera, and with that, you can take any sorts of photography. So, let's just take a break here real quick. I'm doing a lot of talking. All right. Sorry, I'm a very weird teacher. You're gonna come to know this about me. Oh, man, you just fell over. Or maybe it's a Zoom meeting, and then it was my phone. I don't know. But anyway, with what I've taught you today, you can take a picture of anything, any time of the day, any subject matter. If you're taking a landscape, let's just go over general camera values you might set. So if you're taking the landscape, maybe you want to be shooting anywhere from f5.6 at the minimum, maybe if you don't have much light, to f11, because you want a deep depth of field, you want everything to be in focus. It wouldn't be good to take a picture of a landscape at f2 because only a part would be in focus, and then maybe your foreground would be really blurry and kind of mushy looking. And you kind of don't want that for landscapes. But if you're taking portraits, that's whenever you want that shallow depth of field. And those are two photographic ideas where the aperture is most important. But shutter speed might be really important if you're taking sports, action, kind of stuff like that. Maybe you want to show motion or freeze motion. That's when your shutter speed is very important. And ISO is really just important in low light. You might want good ISO performance if you have to set your, let's say you're photographing at night and you're shooting a cityscape. You obviously want everything to be in focus, so you have to stop down your aperture to like f8 or something like that. So you're not letting in a bunch of light. Maybe you can slow down your shutter speed to 1/10 of a second if you have it on a tripod, so you don't get camera shake, because if you make your shutter speed too low, just you holding the camera after it's so slow of a shutter speed, you'll see that motion blur. So if you're shooting on a tripod, you can have a slower shutter speed and kind of make up for that light. But say you're still shooting at f8 and it's nighttime, and even if you're doing a whole second as your shutter speed on a tripod, you still might not have enough light, and that's where ISO comes into play. And that's this digital gain, making your image sensor more, what is the word I'm looking for? More responsive, more sensitive to the light that it's seeing. But the downside is whenever you have your ISO too high, you get a bunch of grain. Sometimes it's makes up random colors. It's trying to figure out what's there when there's just not enough light for it to actually see. So it would have like pixelated color noise, which doesn't look very good. So try to shoot at a lower ISO unless you want that grain, but you can always add film grain in post, which looks nicer, because film grain is different than digital noise. Film grain and digital noise are essentially the same concept. But anyway, this was a good first lesson. It was nice to meet you. That's your name. I'll see you next week. Let me know what you want to go over. Leave a comment what you want me to go over. Do you want more, I guess it was, okay, now we're out of the character. All right, this was kind of a role play. It was kind of good. I got a little bit of ASMR there. It was just me talking as per usual, but now it's in the context of me being a camera teacher, which this is something people have commented and kind of asked for me to do in the first place, so hopefully you enjoyed. I don't edit my lo-fi videos, so it's just I have these awkward transitions. So that was a good first attempt. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Leave a comment down below. Do you want another camera lesson? Let me know what we can go over. I remember a long time ago, Lo-Fi Love commented in one of my videos, and she said about going over the exposure triangle. So that's for you, Lo-Fi Love. I don't know if you still watch my content or not, but that was very nice of you to leave that comment. And man, all my ASMR peers are like crazy famous now. Like Patty, Lo-Fi Love, like they have like 50K or something like that. Kelly Belly, killing it. Sarah Manganese, I was never really her friend, but she's like my favorite ASMR artist. She's really killing it. She gets like 200,000 views a video. That's crazy. But it's just awesome. The whole ASMR community is growing. I feel like I'm very niche, so the channel is not growing as fast, but it's fine. I'm doing what I love, and I have an audience that likes what I do. That's all that really matters to me at the end, not the bigger number. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. I plan to do my next video to be a hi-fi video with the cursive writing. So thanks for watching, guys. Bye.